I've played a lot of bad games, some classified as the worst ever made, so when Ride to Hell Retribution came out, a lot of people were telling me that it's worse than Bubsy 3D. So, I'll be the judge of that.
I've reviewed a lot of bad games. I've reviewed games like Rascal, Sonic 2006, Superman 64, E.T. for the Atari 2600, Captain Noveland, and I even reviewed Bubsy 3D twice because it deserved to be hurt twice. And Bubsy 3D has taken the top spot as the worst game I've ever played. So much so that it's actually the lowest rating on my scale. I've gotten questions as to why some of the really bad games only got a liquid shit rating and not the Bubsy 3D one. Well, to put it simply, for a game to get the Bubsy 3D rating, like its namesake, the game in question that I'm reviewing has to fail on all fronts: graphics, sound, controls, gameplay, programming, and story. I was asked why Sonic 2006 only got the liquid shit rating. Reason being is that for 2006, the graphics were really good and the soundtrack is amazing. And there were very rare moments of fun, and it was at least playable. It had some redeeming qualities that kept it from getting the Bubsy 3D rating. Superman 64 was nearly unplayable, but it was more boring than anything. Big Rigs, while a bad game, it's an incomplete product and more of a pre-alpha, an engine test if you will.
I bought this game brand new for $10, and when the transaction was complete, the GameStop employee told me, "Don't you dare bring this back."
During development, German publisher Deep Silver wanted to create a movie-styled game with British developer Eutechnics, a developer who mostly makes mediocre racing games. But this is their most well-known game due to its poor quality. Originally, it was supposed to be an open-world game, where you could drive various cars, had hand-to-hand combat, as well as guns that you could also do while riding a motorcycle. They wrote the story, recorded dialogue, and motion captured for the cutscenes, and then it was cancelled, only to be revived as an action game with a biker theme. Originally, it was going to be very similar to a Grand Theft Auto game, kind of like the first Saints Row, a game that started off as a GTA clone but then would turn into the wacky funhouse it is today from the second game onward. Ride to Hell Retribution is a game that from the second you start it, you can tell that it was gutted and stripped of its original concept to bring us what I can only describe as a cobbled mess.
It's not uncommon for games to turn from one thing to another, and I'm just glad that this isn't an open world. Otherwise, it would be one big, boring, barren wasteland.
The graphics look like a very early Xbox 360 or a very late original Xbox game. When you look at the textures up close, you can see that they're low resolution, as you'll notice pixelation. Every male is built like a gorilla. They have these massive cartoon arms, which I guess was the art style they were going for. The art style is in between realistic and cartoony. Like they started out trying to make it look like Brutal Legend and changed their minds halfway through building the models, which is a stark contrast to the women in the game, who, in comparison, look more real, only overly sexualized, but more realistic. The animation is terrible. Not Sonic Adventure 2 puppets on a string cutscene animation bad. In fact, I would welcome that. That's hilarious. The way things are animated are like a run-down Disney animatronic. That kind that are so old and barely functioning because they stopped taking care of them. It just looks sad and the mouth flaps up and down unnaturally in the cutscenes. The voices are fine and fit the characters, but the acting itself is flat and emotionless. The music, whenever it decides to play, is good for the first time you hear it if you like old rock music.
It's about 4 tracks that just repeat, so it goes from good to okay to please stop to why won't it end?
The controls are so clunky that you could practically hear it. When riding on your motorcycle, it's stiff and there's no traction at all. It's like putting a car into neutral, shutting it off, and letting it coast down a road covered in oil. The turning is stiff, but you slide all over the road. And then it turns into a game of bumper cars where you bounce around. If you bounce off one side of the road, you'll go careening into the other side. And if you run into something and get stuck, the screen fades to black and puts you a few feet back down the road to try again. Other reviewers have said that it puts you ahead of where you were. That didn't happen with me. And even if you get unstuck, the game still fades to black and puts you back down the road. When controlling Jake, it's not stiff nor is it loose, but it doesn't feel right. He gets caught on walls even if he's just slightly touching them. Hand-to-hand combat is trying to be like the Batman Arkham games. It's not even trying to be a poor man's Batman game. It's worse than that. It's a destitute, poverty-stricken Batman Arkham game. You can punch with the A button, use X to break your opponent's guard, which doesn't work as it should, and you can counter with the Y button, which almost never works, and can block with the same button, which never works.
Believe it or not, failing at driving and melee combat was not enough. They had to be a triple threat and fail at gunplay too.
If you're up against a wall, you can't pull your gun out. The game just will not let you take aim until you back away from it. If an enemy gets too close to you, the game will freak out if you're trying to shoot them at a close range. All the enemies are walking bulletproof meat shields. You can unload round after round after round and they'll still keep coming at you. The only way to actually kill them quickly is by a headshot, and even that doesn't work some of the time. Most of the time it does, but there are times where it doesn't. Ammo is limited as it doesn't drop as much as it should, so you can run out of ammo, and if you do, you may get screwed, like with one mission that requires you to shoot a tanker to blow it up. The gunplay is bad, but it's workable because aiming isn't that bad when you're at a good enough distance. The only time I had an issue with aiming is when the enemies got too close or when the frame rate started to hemorrhage. Aiming is also pretty stiff, but I found it to be functional, because you can work with it when the frame rate isn't choking.
And it doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. I wish it did, but this game is just such a big ball of fail. It's like a snowball effect, except for it's not snow, just brown and lots of gross.
The game has issues responding to button inputs, sometimes delayed, others not responding at all. Like blocking, it only works when you're not being attacked and then your enemy decides to block. I swear there are times when the game takes your button inputs and applies them to the enemy instead, as I've seen the enemies attack as fast as I press the buttons. But that doesn't really matter, as the enemies are so retarded that it's so sad and pathetic that it's hilarious. There are three types of dudes. Ones that run up to you from a distance and have no self-preservation, and they like to nicely line up single file for headshots. There's dudes who take cover and shoot at you, and they have no aim whatsoever. You can stand in the middle of no man's land and walk out with only a scratch. They can't use cover at all either. Their heads stick out or they get to the wrong side. And finally there's the big dudes who wear hockey masks that can't be killed with a headshot. But there's usually a propane tank that you can shoot about 3 times to make it explode to kill them, instead of unloading all your ammo into just one of them.
Even that's not the end of it. They just had to extend combat to the motorcycle sections as well.
Going back to the motorcycle sections, which are ridiculously long and unneeded, they decided to add combat to it, resulting in sections that are so bad that they're actually good. I found myself laughing at the sheer audacity of the over-the-top silliness of it all. When you're going down the road, you'll notice at times your bike and camera will jerk into a locked position and an enemy will teleport in from the side. And I mean they literally teleport in. They just pop in from the side. There's no gradual approach from behind, or maybe you see them waiting up the road. Nope, they pop right in at such a speed that they would more than likely crash into you. Once you're locked, you have to mash whichever button pops up until the bar fills. Once that bar is filled, the enemy falls off their bike, which goes flying to the side of the road and explodes. There will be enemies that will just fly past you and into the side of the road themselves like they were fireworks. But there are times where the game slows down, you pull out your gun and have to shoot enemies, which is difficult because the enemies are so far away that you can barely see them. This is one of the more frustrating aspects. It's worse when you have to ride in a sidecar and shoot moving targets on a road that twists and turns, as the frame rate starts to chug, making aiming next to impossible.
You know, it's games like this where some kind of lemon law or recall law needs to be put in place for bad software, so this way customers can get their money back. And I'm not even joking.
The camera is terrible. The placement is wrong for this type of game. If it was strictly an over-the-shoulder shooter, it'd be fine, but it's also a brawler, so the angle doesn't work as Jake is usually off to the left side. But the camera is intelligent enough to move backwards and centers Jake when you start using melee attacks. But it's not smart enough to move out of the way when Jake has his back to the wall and when you're trying to aim as it gets stuck behind his head, making it impossible to see anything. And if this happens, you can actually see that Jake has a bald spot where they didn't finish building the model. The game also has QuickTime events which are done so badly and they fail so hard that it transcends to actually being successful. We can all agree that QuickTime events suck, and having them thrown randomly into a game is just lazy, as they come when you never expect them, prompting people to fail and die the first time around. But here, you can pretty much tell exactly when they come, as the camera angle changes and the game slows down, giving you ample time to prepare. And when the button to press pops up, it gives you plenty of time to press it, and even if you press the wrong button, it doesn't fail you, and in fact pauses the timer, giving you time to press the correct one.
It's like the game knows it sucks and it's like, yeah, we know, here, just try again.
And if you're having a difficult time because the game is programmed so badly, it'll ask if you want to tone down the difficulty so you can get through the section. At least the developers knew that their game sucked and were considerate enough to add this option in. And another thing with melee combat, if Jake's too far away, he'll slide in close to an opponent to attack. And while I said that X doesn't always break their guard, it does, but not in the way it should. When you hit X, it breaks their guard by pushing them back, but they go right back to guarding. But interestingly, it stuns them for about a second or two, so you can actually defeat the opponent by mashing the X constantly. I actually did this for a boss fight and won. That's hilarious. And there are completely stupid moments in the game. You'll come across a woman in peril, that peril being that they're being harassed by men into sex. And they're on the verge of being sexually assaulted, and after you save them, they have sex with you.
I have no words for that, but merely a look that the developers are insane.
I can't even make sense of that. First off, most of these women are prostitutes, and from what you can hear, the guy paid her and she's refusing to sleep with him. So you kill the guy who is about to rape the woman, and she in turn sleeps with Jake. Yeah, because that's the first thing a rape victim, regardless of profession, wants to do, is sleep with the person who rescued them. The only situation that actually makes some sense is when you help a female auto mechanic get her mother's wedding ring back after you beat her ex-husband to a pulp. I only say it makes sense because it's a situation you see in action movies, but doesn't make it right. There's another situation where you help a bartender who is about to get sexually assaulted. You beat up the guys and she sleeps with you on a pool table. That makes no sense, and makes light of the situation that the woman was about to get raped. And this isn't the time to discuss rape in video games. That will be next week. But it just gives a very, very misogynistic view of women by treating them as whores. The sex scenes, which I won't show due to the possibility of it being inappropriate content, are laughable. The characters have their clothes on and it borders on bestiality as Jake looks more like a gorilla than a human.
This game is horribly paced. You start off at a turret section with no rhyme or reason, then it goes to a cutscene, and then a QuickTime event, and then another long cutscene before you get to do anything.
The second you start the game, you're put into a turret section, then given a cutscene, then a QuickTime event, and then another cutscene. Why not just make it one cutscene? After a motorcycle section and a very long cutscene, you're thrown into a mission, and after you complete the mission, you get to go to the hub world. Shouldn't you be in the hub world first? It's even more confusing when the story starts. There's also quite a few missions that are time-based. You get plenty of time, but because of the bad programming, you'll just barely make it. And some missions are absolutely stupid. To deal with an electric fence, Jake hijacks a gas tanker, drives it to the power plant, and why this is a timed mission, I don't know, makes it from one side of the plant to the other to shoot the tanker until it explodes. I actually blew up the tanker the second the clock hit 0, but the game failed me. I had to do this mission a few times because I had no idea what I needed to do or where I needed to go. The game doesn't give you the objective, but it'll give you tooltips on how to take cover and block non-stop. But God forbid that the game tells you what you actually need to do. Another time the game absolutely refused to switch the weapon I needed to blow up the tanker. And the game doesn't tell you how to switch weapons either, which is pressing down on the D-pad to swap melee weapons, and left on the D-pad to switch guns.
And that's how Jay Conway disables an electric fence, because getting a pair of rubber gloves and wire cutters is just way too... You know, that would have been a lot easier and quicker.
The story isn't bad, but it's just cliche, and I'm not posting a time in which to skip because there should be no reason as to why you would want to play this game other than curiosity on seeing how bad this game is. The game is set in 1969. Jay Conway just got back from Vietnam and goes to be with his uncle and younger brother. The brother throws a tantrum and goes out, and Jake chases after him. They bond for about 15 seconds before a biker gang comes up, harasses the brother, and chases after them because of the vest he was wearing. The gang catches up to them wanting to know where the vest came from. The brother says it belonged to their dad, the brother is killed, and Jake is shot and left for dead. 10 days later, Jake heads out to kill the biker gang, which pretty much owns the town, his uncle helping him along the way. Turns out Jake's father was a high-ranking biker in a gang called Retribution, and was the rival to a gang called the Devil's Hand, who are the main antagonists. There's no character development at all. It's just bland and basic. It's nothing you wouldn't see in an action movie like Commando or Collateral Damage, where the hero makes his way through the lowest to the highest ranking members of the people that he's after, until he finds and kills the leader to fulfill his revenge.
I could deal with a tired and cliche story if this pile of crap wasn't 12 hours long. The developers must be completely devoid of common sense, otherwise they would have trimmed this POS down to 4 hours.
Most bad games are usually a few hours long, making the pain of playing them short, but this game is like laying naked face down on a bed while someone hits your balls with a rubber mallet for 12 hours. The art style is weird, the graphics are gross, the textures take longer to load than they should, the sound, when it's there, it's generic and wears out quickly. The voice acting is terrible, the controls are unresponsive and clunky, the gameplay is schizophrenic, the game has to load for everything but at least it loads faster than Sonic 06. The story is lame, it treats women in such a way that it would make Duke Nukem blush, and despite all of that, the game is somehow functional. Despite everything I've said, the game is playable. By some miracle, the game is playable. It is a bad game, but you can tell that they put effort into it. Maybe if it was playtested instead of booted out the door to try and make some of their money back from the 5 to 6 years of development it went through, it may have just been mediocre instead of terrible. Is it the worst game of 2003? Depends on a few factors. Is it the worst game ever? Probably not. Is it the worst game I ever played? That's a hard no. It's not. Bubsy 3D still takes that spot.
Now you're probably wondering, how could it not be just as bad, if not worse, than Bubsy 3D, and what do I mean that they put effort into it?
When you look at Bubsy 3D, it was terrible first time, especially when compared to Crash Bandicoot, which came out the month before Bubsy 3D. It looks like they quickly built it and pushed it out the door without even trying to learn how to develop for the PS1, because the game is unplayable. Ride to Hell Retribution at least tried to use the Batman Arkham melee system. It tried to use Uncharted shooting mechanics. The game world at least looks like a desert town somewhere out west, and at least they put an effort to try to learn the software development kits to make the game on the PS3, 360, and PC. So about it being the worst game of 2013, that depends. Are we talking about games across all platforms? Then probably not, as Steam has released tons and tons of garbage with their Greenlight and Early Access system. And Ash's Cricket 2013, which was for the PC, was so bad that it was pulled from sale. However, it's probably the worst game for 2013 if we're only talking about PS3 and 360 games. Is it the worst game ever? Highly doubt it, as all I need to do is point to Steam's Greenlight and Early Access system again, and reference games like The War Z, now known as Infestation Survivor Stories, and Earth 2066, just to name a few examples.
In the end, I found myself laughing hysterically at this game. It's so bad, it's good.
I'd say that for $10, I got my full entertainment value out of this game. It's on par with those made-for-TV movies on Sci-Fi, like Sharknado or any other mockbuster movie made by the Asylum. The game tries to take itself seriously, but the more serious it tries to be, the funnier it is. The characters you meet are so over-the-top stereotypical that you can't help but shake your head and laugh. The sex scenes are done so poorly, and the fact that they have their clothes on, and what leads up to the sex scenes, is so juvenile and stupidly misogynistic that it's laughable. The action is over the top, knocking guys off their motorcycles so the bike goes flying off into a wall and explodes like a nuclear bomb, or they just kill themselves. The enemy AI is so incredibly stupid, like guys lining up single file for easy headshots, or they don't get behind cover correctly if at all. They have the worst aim I've ever seen in a game, and they run into walls constantly like they don't know where they're going. While I got frustrated at certain parts, for the most part, I was laughing at how stupid this game is.
When I say it's so bad it's good, that's not a guilty pleasure. That would mean that there's something about this game that I like, and I don't. I hate it, but I love to hate it, and I can't help but laugh at how stupid it is.